Lately, I've been using Excel more and more for a variety of reasons in personal projects, and then also at work, being a teacher for grades, assessments, various student data. And as I use it more and more, I want to customize it or I want to build macros for it. I'm more experienced with JavaScript, however, Visual Basic, although a pain at times, is somewhat straightforward. This macro that I'm about to build or am building sub match IDs. What I need to do is I'm taking students' IDs. I have them on two sheets. One sheet is output by a program that I have, something that students use, and it includes student scores on it. However, it doesn't have their names or their grades, grade level. It only has their scores. The second sheet, or the first sheet actually, has their names, their score, their names, their student IDs, and their grade level. That is one I can import directly into my gradebook program. So what I want to do is match those IDs and transfer the scores from the second sheet onto that first sheet. Obviously, this could be used in a variety of ways, whether it's student IDs or employee IDs. It's a number matching program. So first off is declaring our variables. And what I have here is last row sheet 1, last row sheet 2. Both of those are an integer. To declare a variable in VBA, it is different. At least I found it different, being dim and then the variable. And then next I declared a next, I declared a variant. A variant, though, is actually an array. I found it strange, but I declared an array or a variant. ID1 will be an array of all the IDs from the first sheet, and ID2 will be an array of all the IDs for the second sheet. Dim scores will be the scores from that second sheet. That's the data we want to transfer to the first sheet. And let's see, I'm writing a comment, get data, and output it into an array. And now a loop. For C equals 2, we are starting at 2, and I'm doing that because that's the row the data actually starts on. And we're going to the last row of the sheet. You'll notice that I declared last row sheet 1, and then I didn't initialize it. I didn't actually define what that variable will be. I'll realize that at the end. So now that I have my loop set up, read and preserve C1. Read and preserve ID1C. Readm I find a bit confusing. What that is actually doing, though, is reallocating data or the storage space for the array variable. The preserve is used to, well, it's used to keep the data that we already had, and we're just tacking a new array variable on the end of it. I'm going to quickly show that our IDs, the column that they are in, because we will need that to set up now that we are adding the ID, now that we are adding each ID to our array. And they are located, in column 3. Great. I was really excited about my whole windmill special effect. I usually use a sliding one. I thought it was kind of cool and lame, so why not point it out? So we're using ID1C equals, we're setting that equal to information from sheet 1, cells, then C is the row, that's what we're iterating through with our loop, 3 is the column, as I just demonstrated. Now what I'm about to do is very similar, and I even use C again, but what we're going to do now is use this to loop through that second sheet. That second sheet, I need to gather the IDs into another array. It's less taxing to put them into an array rather than have the program loop through each sheet each time we need to use them. It streamlines it for us. And again, read and preserve, I'm reallocating that storage space, I'm preserving the original data, and I'm adding one at a time each ID onto the end. I'm checking the column, so scores is that second sheet. Oh, IDs on the second sheet is column 1, Scores is in the second column. So I'm going to need to change ID2C. I'm going to need to change that column from 3 to 1. And now read and preserve scores. This all makes sense. Scores sheet 2, cell C, row C, column 2. Okay, now we have all of that in arrays for us. And finally, we're going to use a loop to compare our IDs and output that data. Again, I'm using for C because I'm infinitely inventive. It's already a fine variable to count. For C2 last row sheet. And again, I'm going to go back and initialize or define what that last row sheet 2 is. I put the next so I don't forget it because I would. And this one I need a nested loop. So now I need a new variable for my loop, which is horrible because C was working so well for us. Being inventive again though, I've used in, C for count, and for number. We're starting at 2 again because all of our data is starting at the second row. And then something I would like to point out too, though, is that our arrays are actually starting with 2, not like 0 or 1, something more traditional. VBA and Excel allows you to do that because it will then correlate with the row that it actually comes from. It makes sense, but I found it strange. This if statement, if ID2, C, and then in, we're checking if the IDs from sheet 2 and sheet 1, if they do happen to match, we're going to output their scores. The reason that we have 2 separate loops, of course, is because sheet 2 might have less or more students on it than sheet 1. Students might have added my class or dropped the class, moved or skipped the test, hopefully not skipped, were ill that day. So I do need 2 separate loops to make sure we go through both sheets in their entirety. Finally, as promised, I'm initializing those original variables of last row from sheet 1, last row from sheet 2, and defining what they actually are. You're going to do, well, maybe you won't, but I do this in most projects. I often need to be looping through my rows to know what is going on. Sheets 1.cells, rows.count, comma 1, and this is standard for me. And let's run it. Yes, I use num, which, as I had stated, I used in for that nested loop, and let's run it now. I think this one, yes, success. So now let me show you what it actually does, what the product of this will actually be. Here we are. So here's the roster of my students. These names are all fake because I'm not insane, but this is Brett, and Brett has an 85. I'm going to go ahead and copy his ID, and I'm going to search for it on this scores page. Let's make sure that Brett has an 85 here, and he does. So that means my score is correctly transferred. They matched up, and they matched up to the first sheet, and the scores were moved over, making it tremendously easier for me to upload those scores because that first sheet has their names, and I can successfully upload it into my grading program. This is something I found useful. This macro in particular I've been using a lot lately, so I thought I would share it. Maybe it will be useful to you as well. Feel free to steal it, to change it, to edit it, whatever you need.